Welcome to the 6th DEM I Wonder webinar. DEM has so many services, offerings, programs, and hidden gems that we want to share with all of you. So we're excited to take just a few minutes each week to highlight these features in our weekly webinar. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many exercises have been postponed or canceled. The Utah Division of Emergency Management is hosting this weekly webinar series aimed at providing local emergency managers with relevant content and opportunities to enhance their capabilities. Webinars will be live for Q&A and will be recorded for later viewing on the DEM website and YouTube channel. Most of these webinars will be workshops with a hands-on portion, which will allow emergency managers to test a DEM product or process. Our schedule today will be as follows. We'll start with our ground rules and etiquette. Next, we'll have a brief presentation by Jeff Johnson on I wonder what programs exist to support our schools in being prepared. Following the presentation, there will be a hands-on portion where participants will be encouraged to test out a product or process that was presented. Following the hands-on portion of our program, the presenter will be available for a Q&A session. Following the Q&A, we'll close with a short message about upcoming webinars. The ground rules today are fairly simple. Please mute your line while the presenter is presenting. If you have a question, you may type it in the group chat or unmute at the appropriate time to ask your question. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website for future viewing. Thank you all for your attendance today. And with that, we'll turn the time over to Jeff Johnson.
Okay. We'll look for that presenting tab here, Tracy. There we go. So do this, do this, do this. Okay, Tracy, are you seeing that multi-slide?
Yeah, we see all the slides right now.
Okay, so we will pop it up and then switch these. There, you should see the intro slide.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit today about what schools ought to be ready for, and really this is a concern to all of us because most of us have kids or know kids who go to school, and even if you're like Tracy and your kids are just reaching that kindergarten age, we need to make sure that when our kids are at school, they are really protected and prepared. The schools are able to protect these children of ours by being prepared, and that's what we're going to talk about today. A little bit about our emergency operation plans for schools, and really that they don't just focus on fires and active shooters, but that they have a multi-hazard approach to this. Jefferson, when he founded public education in the late 1700s for the citizens of the United States, said that schools have been charged with the safety of children in their care, and there is a duty to protect in that charge. And that means that teachers and administrators have the responsibility to anticipate potential dangers and to take precautions to protect their students from those dangers. So that's the question today we're going to talk about. Obviously, the schools have that duty to protect, and our teachers and administrators taking that responsibility to anticipate potential dangers and then doing preparedness and precautions, putting those in place to protect the students from those dangers. You know, Herbert Hoover said that children are our most valuable resource, but I think John F. Kennedy said it better when he said children are the world's most valuable resource and its best hope for the future. Children are our most valuable resource. I'm going to ask you a question. This is rhetorical. And speaking of questions, if you have any, you can type them in the chat and Tracy can kind of monitor those. But you can also ask them online at the end. But this is rhetorical, but I'm going to ask you, is there anything more important in life than keeping our children safe? If anybody can come up with a answer that there's something more important than our children, I'd love to hear it. And I think we need to focus on keeping these children safe. So the question also is how do you maintain a learning environment, an open, free learning environment, and ensure daily safety and security? My wife right now is standing in front of a second grade class, and she's been teaching this is her 35th year, and she won't quit because she loves it. And and she's in front of a class right now, and she needs to have that open, free, interactive learning environment. But there's also an issue of maintaining safety and security, and that is the problem that schools are tasked with. We need to understand that disasters happen. They are a part of life. We know this more now than ever because of the 24-hour news cycle, and we see disasters from all over the world that 20 years ago or 25 years ago we wouldn't see at all. And we know these things happen, and we also know how they affect people. And there's two different kinds of disasters. There's natural disasters, which we talk about a lot: wildfires, floods, earthquakes, severe winter storms. But there's also man-made disasters that could be happen. They're technological. There could be a dam failure, or even some kind of a power outage, or even a violent extremist attacking schools. And so there are man-made disasters, and we need to be prepared for both of these and have things in place. A lot of schools don't think about bomb threats, and yet they are becoming more and more prevalent. There was, in the year before COVID, there was 20 of those bomb threats that occurred here in the state of Utah that were directed at schools. How does a school handle that? There's a great story that when we go out and teach this Are Your Schools Ready program to schools, there's a great story that we tell about a charter school that was in the South Salt Lake County area that got a bomb threat, and they deemed it credible. And when law enforcement showed up, they were a little concerned that this was a real threat and decided to evacuate the school. But not only just evacuate the school, they wanted everybody 1,600 feet from the school. Well, that put the kids off the property. Now, the school had done lots and lots of drills for fire by moving the kids outside to safe locations on the property, but they'd never had anybody say, go off the property. And so it's raining when this happens, of course. And when the law enforcement started securing the front entrances, they decided they didn't want the kids carrying backpacks or even their coats. And so they made them remove coats and backpacks and pile them by the front door. Now you have over 600 kids in the neighborhood trying to figure out where in that neighborhood they can take these kids. And as we teach this training, we talk about how that was resolved in the next 30 to 45 minutes, but it's things schools need to understand. They might not only need to evacuate from the school building, but also off the property. The right picture here shows another threat that schools often don't think about. If that tanker carrying 1050 methyl ethyl death rolls over in the proximity of the school, and the school ends up in the plume from that, what does the school do? How do they protect the kids inside? They obviously can't evacuate the outside out into the plume, and so they need to have protocols in place to ensure the kids' safety if a hazardous material spill occurs on the block or even within a half mile of the school, and the school's is downwind and in the plume. So there's lots of things that we need to talk about and address with them. This is another one. This is a picture from Joplin, Missouri, when the Joplin EF5 tornado hit. There were 5 schools that were severely damaged on that afternoon, and were completely untenable. The students couldn't go back in those schools and continue the learning process. And so what do schools do? If all of a sudden your school becomes untenable, and it's going to be untenable for the next 8 months to a year or more, where do you hold school the next morning? And we tell great stories on this training about how Joplin, Missouri, and other locations have dealt with this crisis, and how they have planned ahead to be able to create alternative learning locations and move the kids there. And just to fill that in, the kids from this particular school happened to end up later that week in an abandoned, empty old Mervyn store. And they set up school in the Mervyn store. And that's where those kids went to school until the school was repaired. So there's other things I need to think about in prior planning and in preparing about where you might need to take kids to alternate learning locations if the school's untenable. This is a whole community preparedness. This is not just following the first responders to the fire departments and police departments. This is everybody in the school needs to be involved in this. When we evacuate kids to other locations, we need to have the community involved in that and providing those locations And there's also all kinds of community involvement in prior planning with schools. And there's also tons of community involvement on the day something actually happens to those schools. And we realize that with this whole community preparedness principle, that everybody has a role to play. And it is true that the community can do a lot in helping schools both prepare and respond to disasters. We live in a 911 society. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means if you encounter a problem in your day that is above your ability to handle, above your pay grade, and you don't know what to do, you pick up the phone and call 911 and get somebody there who can handle it. Well, there are days, on disaster days, on that day, when nobody's going to be able to come. And we have got to learn not to rely on calling for help all the time. You might be on your own for an hour, for a half a day, for a couple days. And we talk to schools extensively about how much can they handle and for how long. And sometimes you just can't call 911 and get somebody on the other end to come and help. And so this is about being self-sufficient for an extended period of time to keep those children safe and protected. So I have a recording there I'm not going to play. It's just a silly recording about the things that people call 911 for. So preparedness realities. What we need here is a preparedness mindset. What could happen? What can we do? How do we prepare for that? How do we respond to that? What are the eventualities that might play out that we need to be able to look at? How do you survive the unthinkable? The things that happened that day when nobody planned for this and nobody thought this could happen. Can you adapt and overcome? Can you meet the needs of the children on that day? And that's what we're trying to teach people. Winston Churchill, before World War II, was speaking to the House of Commons, and he said, want of foresight, unwillingness to act when action would be simple and effective, lack of clear thinking, confusion of counsel until the emergency comes, until self-preservation strikes its jarring gong. These are the features which constitute the endless repetition of history. It's true. We by nature don't actually work at getting ready. It's something we need to learn how to do. Readiness, preparedness, precautions are things that are learned and we need to be taught. And schools are no different. They need to be made aware of the possibilities and then provided help and guidance in how to deal with those. So why don't people get ready? Why is that statement from Winston Churchill true? Well, it's because in studies, it's been shown that people have a tendency to have apathy. They just really aren't concerned until the jarring gong strikes and all of a sudden it's upon them. We're a very complacent people. This pandemic may have changed some of that, hopefully, but complacency is a human nature. And sometimes we just want to stretch out on our couch and not worry about this. There are people who have denial. In my 25 years of law enforcement, I had people who would tell me they wouldn't lock their car doors. They wouldn't lock their house doors because they'd lived there for 50 years and nothing had ever happened and nothing was going to. And some people live in denial. They just don't believe things can happen. There's also an interesting new phenomenon about desensitization. We see so much of this on the news, on the TV, in our social media streams, that sometimes we get a little desensitized to it. And that can negatively affect us in getting ready or doing things to prepare. Benjamin Franklin said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And there is truth in that statement. So let's talk a little bit about where our kids are at and where we're at during preparedness. During a disaster, you have a 50% chance of being home. The average person spends about 50% of their time at home. They have a 25% chance of being at work or at school, and they also have a 25% chance of being elsewhere. So based on that, where do our children spend most of their time or much of their time? And again, it is at home, but they do spend a lot of time at school. Utah state law says they have to be in school 180 days. and the instruction time is equivalent to 990 hours. And so they have to be at school 180 days. If schools are shut down, they either have to make those days up during holiday time or into the summer vacation, or the legislature has to waive it, which has happened. So with that 180 days a year, that 990 hours, that's how much time the school has our children in their custody. They are responsible for. But there's also travel time. And school bus safety is a whole other thing, which we're not going to talk about today, but that's a whole issue too, about keeping them safe traveling to and from school. There's also extracurricular activities. If kids are at school for sports activities or clubs, or they're there for a carnival or some kind of event that's occurring at the school, that 990 hours grows exponentially. And kids can be at school a lot more than just the required mandatory legal time of that 180 days a year. So that begs the question, and I'm going to have you answer this to yourself. Do parents believe their children are safe each and every day at school? Would you pull up in front of the school and drop your kid off and your child off and let them enter that school if you didn't believe it was safe? And I believe most parents, if you talk to them, believe that their children are safe at school and the schools are prepared to handle any eventuality. And that's the next question is, do you expect your children to come home safe to you every day after school? So those are the questions that have to be asked. And again, that puts the onus back on the schools to be multi-hazard prepared, to be able to prepare and take care of our schools. Our children. And so, are you ready? I'm not going to play this audio. It's a phone recording from Columbine School. We go through a bunch of these real life scenarios and laying out the need for schools to be prepared. But this is a recording of Patty. She's the school librarian, and you can only describe her state as being in a panic and being confused and being terrorized and frightened and not having any clue what to do while the shots were going off in the hallway of Columbine High School in 1999. And that is not how we keep our kids safe. We need to have protocols and plans in place so that if the unthinkable happens, that the staff of the school is prepared to handle that, or at least have some idea of actions they can take to increase safety and protection. So we do show these videos during the presentation. So there's 3 questions that really ought to be asked of all school administrators, and they ought to be asked today. And the first one is, if circumstances require, could you shelter your entire student body overnight with no power and no running water? But could you do that? If there's an event or an incident that's occurred that precludes the parents from coming and picking their kids up, precludes the students from being released from school and being able to make their way home, either by bus or by car, could you shelter them? And you say, well, does that happen? Well, yeah, in 2014, in February, Atlanta City had an ice storm, really unprecedented event. And drives that were taking 30 minutes were now taking 10 hours to accomplish. In fact, most people who tried to drive ended up parking their cars and just walking. Your car, you couldn't keep your car straight on the road. Things were so covered in ice. 14 schools ended up keeping kids overnight because the school buses could not get there to take them home. And one high school had 1,400 kids that stayed the entire night. And we need to ask schools, are you ready for that? Could that happen? Could your student body, part or all of it, be kept at your school overnight because of a problem? And with an earthquake or something like that, you're not going to have power and you're not going to have running water. What does running water mean? It means the toilets won't flush. So these are issues that schools need to address. Second one is, do you have a way to evacuate your kids right now if there was a problem in the school? If for some reason the school at this moment is untenable and you've got to get the kids out of it, and we can go through a myriad of reasons that has happened, but do you have a memorandum of agreement and possess keys for an alternate shelter location? Do I have somewhere to move these kids to safely? And The other question of that is, have you practiced it? I can relate a dozen really good stories of people who had such incredible lessons learned by practicing their evacuations. And that's just what needs to happen. They need to have this MOA, they need to have keys, they need to be able to walk the kids to that school, that alternate school location, and they need to have practiced it. And again, this is something to walk up to the administrator of the school where your kids attend and say, where do you take my kids if the school's untenable? And are you ready for that? So, and the third one is reunification. Reunification is a big thing that schools often don't plan for or prepare for in its entire eventuality. The reunification means the parents are going to come to their schools and pick kids up, and that means this has three moving parts. It has the staff of the school and the students, which are obvious, but it also has to include the parents. And if the parents have no idea or no clue what's going on, you have no plan really in place. Reunification policies have to be practiced with parents. This is a tripod. Envision a tripod. If you remove one leg, it falls. And this is something we're trying to get schools throughout the state to do and make sure that they practice reunification. It can either look like this picture right here, which shows you an orderly, calm procedural process that is in practice and the parents have a good idea what's going on. And again, I'll tell you something about parents. If you can get 60 to 70% or 60% of your parents to come and practice this, the other parents who arrive who've never been through that will follow the parents who know what they're doing. And so it doesn't require 100% of the parents to show up. It shows you need enough of them to show up that they can help the other parents that arrive that aren't familiar with the process. But again, it could look like that, or it could look like this. This is a hallway of a school in Pennsylvania that had actually turned into a riot. And when they called the police, they couldn't even get the police inside the building because it was so packed. So again, reunifications need to be practiced with the parents so that it's a calm, orderly process and happens quickly. And to put that in perspective, I'll just tell you a story here. The first year my wife did a reunification drill with the parents. For 680 students, it took 2 hours and 41 minutes to return all of those children to their parents in that process. The last time they did it, it took 41 minutes. I mean, they did it in under an hour. They did it in under 45 minutes. And so that's where practicing drills, exercising your plan is so important. And they can really release most of the kids in that school in under an hour. The only thing that delays that is the parents' arrival. So good plans. So what can you do? Well, these are the 12 things we go out and talk about. And I'm not going to cover all these today because this is just an I Wonder presentation, but realize these are the 12 things schools need to be doing to be fundamentally sound in their preparedness and their protection of their students. They need to have an emergency operation plan, an EOP that covers everything. It's a multi-hazard plan that covers the kind of things that maybe they haven't thought about. Number two, they need basic school preparedness needs: water, food, heat, shelter, sanitation, communication to the outside world if the phone lines are down. They're just some basic school preparedness needs they need to cover. There are 11 drills that are required for schools to practice within a 3-year time period by statute, by state law. And we talk about those drills and the need to practice each one of those and make sure that everybody's on board with how this is supposed to go down and what needs to be done. We talk about shelter in place. Schools don't spend a lot of time thinking about this, but if you have a plume of methyl ethyl death blowing over the school, how do you shelter in place? How quickly can you turn off your HVAC so it's not pulling that plume inside the building? Where can you move the kids to that's a safe location downwind in the school? So there's a lot of things to talk about with shelter in place with schools. Again, we talked about this earlier, but evacuation protocols. Do you have an MOA and do you have keys? And is that practiced? Reunification plans. We talked about that just a moment ago and how important those are. We have been talking to schools since 2013 about pandemic and infections. And we've been doing that in conjunction with the local health departments when we go talk to them. That has taken on a new reality. And it's kind of interesting as you see this list to realize a lot of people thought that was, oh, that's out there. Yeah, that could happen. And again, this pandemic we're going through right now doesn't have a severe mortality rate. It's not a 25 or 30% mortality rate that some of the viruses in the world cause, like Ebola and Marburg and others. So we could have that happen one day. And these are things that schools need to prepare for, as we can see at this point. We love to talk to them about student education, about teaching kids the need to be prepared and the reasons why, and to answer their questions about it. So there are all kinds of really good student education programs out there, both from FEMA and the Red Cross and elsewhere, that teachers in their classrooms can employ to increase the knowledge and understanding in the education of students. And that's very important. We do talk to schools about the National Incident Management System, about the fact that if the fire department or the police department shows up in their parking lot, they're probably going to set up a FEMA-based incident command system. And the school's administration, front office staff, and possibly the janitorial or the maintenance staff needs to be basically involved in school ICS. There is an online ICS 100 class for schools, and we encourage them to take that and become aware. Number 10 is the elephant in the room. Everybody wants to talk about active shooters because it's a fearful and frightening subject to both students and staff and parents. And so we do cover unwanted intruders in schools and active shooter training. The new really effective way of getting schools ready for threats in their schools is have a threat assessment team. These threat assessment teams are made up of professionals, both from outside and inside the school. And without going into this in detail right now, these are teams that meet once a month and look at potential threats to the school, and they assess them and come up with plans to move forward. And these things are super effective. And then again, we end up with staff best training practices. We need to have staff members trained in first aid. We need to have staff members trained in CPR. We would love to see a CERT team, a community emergency response team, inside the school, and have a dozen of the teachers take that and be able to create a team. We need ways to talk outside of normal communication protocols, such as cell phones and landlines. So we push ham radios in schools, and that they might be able to talk if the power and communication systems are down. So, and I could go on. There's a list of about 10 of these staff training best practices, but these are the things we take to schools. As a plug for this is a 2-hour program we will take to any school anywhere. We will also take it to district levels and meet with principals at district level or district staff. We'll take this to charter schools. Prior to the meeting starting today, we talked about one of the schools that we've actually done this with. And we will go to parochial schools and private schools. We'll go anywhere. We've been into some of the Catholic schools in the Salt Lake Valley quite extensively. So this is a program that we will take out to the schools. It's not for the students, it's for the staff of the school. That's the administration and the teachers and the maintenance and even the cook staff and the librarians. We want them all there and help train them about being prepared as a school for all hazards, threats. So that's what Be Ready Schools does. You can contact me or Division of Emergency Management or Tracy, and we'd be happy to come out and talk to your schools. Those of you who are on here and have kids in schools, I'd tell you to go talk to the administrator in the school. Ask those 3 questions that we presented and say, could you house your kids overnight? Do you have a plan for evacuating the schools, and have you practiced your reunification plan? All of those are critical to success of schools handling a major incident. And then we have social media outreach where you can get a hold of us and follow us on Twitter, on Facebook. We send out an email, and you can get on our email list. We talk about trending school preparedness info and FEMA preparations and and we talk about the Utah Shakeout and other things that schools can use to become better prepared. Planning equals prevention. And you just have to ask, what do you bring to the fight on that day? How prepared are you? What can you plug in to make your team, your school, your staff better prepared to keep our children safe? And that's the whole purpose of this program. We're just asking people to be prepared, to work on saving our children, and to make sure that we can do everything we can to ensure their safety, their security, and their survival. So a great American philosopher once said, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. Dr. Seuss. So we need to care, and we need to make things better. So with that, I'll open this to questions, if there are any, Tracy. And I will also turn the screen back over to you and get out of this. So
yeah, you're welcome to leave your screen up with that, Jeff.
Okay.
So it looks like in the chat there was just a couple of comments. Chris Blinzinger brought up that in Spanish Fork, American Leadership Academy does that reunification exercise, and it makes some of their parents mad, but they are very organized. So it's a good process to go through. And then Chris Rep also shared IS 362. It's a multi-hazard emergency planning for schools. So it's an independent study class for those that are interested. And that is the link to that.
We promote that as well.
Perfect.
So.
Yeah, and we can share that link within the description of this video when it is posted, as it is being recorded. I don't have any other questions on the chat right now. If there's any questions, you're welcome to raise your hand or
if I can just make a comment, Tracy. Yeah. I've been to more than 24 schools that have been present during their reunification drill and the exercising of that. I've seen very little pushback from parents that this bothers them or they're unhappy to be there. I'm sure those parents are out there, and I'm sure they're vocal, but I'm going to say most parents actually seem to roll through this with a pretty good attitude.
Yeah.
And I don't see a lot of schools that have had problems with the parents saying, this is unnecessary. So.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. It looks like we've got 2 questions, so we'll start with Bluffdale City.
So, hi, this is Natalie. I worked with one of our local charter schools to do an off-campus reunification. The planning process took 6 months. Well, it actually took a year. We started planning a year in advance. We had parents on the committee. We had teachers on the committee, our local police on the committee, and we worked really, really hard for this reunification, this off-campus reunification. And it was pretty complicated, and it went well. We only had a few parents upset because they work, and they refused to make accommodations for their children to be picked up because we had the IDs, they had to provide all of that. And so just seeing the process, I can understand why maybe some of my other schools aren't willing to do the reunification exercise. Has anybody else had an experience how they've motivated their schools to do this? Any ideas on how to make a first step, maybe to simplify the process or get other schools motivated?
I can answer that. I'm going to see if anybody else has a comment before I do.
Yeah, it looks like Chris Blinzinger was ready, possibly.
I can answer that. I did have another point to make, but Natalie, to your point, I see the greatest benefit, especially with charter schools. They are unique, and to have motivated parents, if you can bend a parent's or several parents' ear, you're much more successful to get something through to that, rather than just with the only effort going to the administration of that school. The parents have a powerful voice. They are fully vested. And when you can get some of those, that really helps facilitate things better. And to my other point about that, I was a evaluator down at the ALA exercise. And what made parents mad was that they're so organized that they have 3-ring binders with every student, pictures of parents, pictures of the student, who can pick them up, who can't pick them up. When the parents don't update those, they do not let someone pick up that parent that is not in their book. That is a parent's problem, but it makes them angry. We did have some students whose parents forgot that they were doing that and that were left there for several hours. And we were out on the bleachers but that's realistic. You might have that. You're not going to capture 100% of those students. Now, just as the schools, and I talked about Carl Mazur, charter schools are so great to work with because they do allow some of those things. And to see that we started that Teen Cert program at that charter school 6 or 7 years ago, and they are still doing that. And those kids are incorporated into their emergency operations plan. It's giving them leadership opportunities. It is enhancing the skill of those students. And they are a large part of that school's emergency plan, which I think is awesome.
And I want to make just 3 quick comments. I'm going to agree with Chris. Once I find that charter schools are far more accepting of this and than public schools, even though I see more public schools doing it. Charter schools are just obviously really great to work with. One of the things you can do, and Chris brought one of these up, is involving the students in this and getting them involved. We usually work with the school administration and then the PTA, the Parent Teachers Association. The PTA can have a lot of influence inside the school about getting one of these underway. And not only can they encourage other parents to be there and work from the inside of the parent organization rather than from the school, but they are very, very good in helping organize this and making it happen. So never, ever neglect your PTA when you're involving parents with any kind of activity at the school that is preparedness related. And the last thing I wanted to say here was every school that I've seen do this makes accommodation for the parents that can't arrive, that can't make it. And there are parents who just can't leave their work. They just can't leave. And so what you do is you conduct that reunification drill, but then the kids who are still there, the 20% that usually remain at the school, you conduct the rest of the school day normally for them and then have them go home on their normal route of getting home, whether that's walking, bus, parents picking them up. So you can do this and you don't need all of the parents. You just need to have a plan to say, when the drill's over, the kids that haven't left, we are going to have regular accommodations for them. And that usually, and that doesn't put any pressure on the parents who can't make it. They know that their kids will be taken care of in a normal fashion. And so like in these drills, at the end of them, when you have that 20% of the students who couldn't participate, and they're participating in the drill, but they couldn't participate with their parents showing up, and then they just go back to school for the remainder of the day, which is usually near the end of the day, within 30 or 45 minutes of the day ending. That's how they usually do these. So it is not necessary really to make sure all of the parents are there. You invite them, you encourage them, you try to get as many as you can. Hopefully that's in the 60% range, and then you make accommodations for the kids and families who couldn't participate. But these are priceless. These are priceless in a crisis. When the Mueller Park shooting happened in Bountiful, the Mueller Park Junior High, they evacuated everybody from that school, which was over 1,000 kids, to the Stake Center just down the street. And if you want to hear lessons learned experiences, talk to the Mueller Park Junior High administration about how they were not ready for that and how it was a painful learning experience. It went very well, don't get me wrong. But they understand completely now and are very strong advocates of practicing your reunification drill, both in the school and offsite at your alternate location. And it's important to practice both of those over a 3 to 5 year period if you can, and then do that repeating in a decade at least twice. So important.
Chris, did you have an additional comment? No. Okay.
Anybody else?
We do have one more comment in the chat. Kimberly Giles brought up that sometimes parents are not able to come because they would have been affected by the disaster, so they physically can't make it there. So it does play into reality that some children will not have parents pick them up. And so how will you then deal with those issues?
Yeah. If you walk up to most schools right now and say, what are you going to do with kids whose parents aren't coming? And they'll say, well, I'm going to call DCFS. Well, go talk to DCF, the Division of Child and Family Services. Go talk to them about that. And they're like, you know, for example, Weber County, where I live, has 26 elementary schools. DCFS has 14 employees in Weber County. If you just even had one kid at each one of the 26 schools, and that's not a reality, you're going to have a dozen or 3 dozen kids whose parents don't show up. DCFS can't accommodate that. There's just no mathematical way that they can deal with 300 or 400 kids from the 26 elementary schools. So schools are going to have the ability in place, in their plans, prepared for, to house those kids at the school until other accommodations can be made, which honestly might take 2 or 3 days after a severe incident. And so one of the things we talk to schools about is what are you going to do with the parents who don't arrive? And beyond that, not to be graphic, but there are some parents in a major incident like an earthquake that might not ever be coming. And they just might have perished in the incident. And you're going to have to develop accommodations for those. And I don't have time here today, I've seen some very creative, outside the box thinking on schools on how they can deal with this. And again, love to do the 2-hour presentation and talk about these things with anybody, anywhere.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Looks like that's all of the questions we had, unless there's anyone else. We'll offer a last chance. All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, for your presentation today. As a reminder, this webinar and all other webinars in this series will be available on the DEM website at dem.utah.gov/exercises. Our webinar next week will be, I wonder what exercise opportunities and tools exist for my local emergency management program. And that will be presented by me, Tracy Bodley. If you have any I wonder topic suggestions, please reach out to me at tbodley@utah.gov to have your topic added to our calendar. We're always excited to help you explore and get to know all that DEM can offer the emergency management community. We thank you again for joining us. Congratulations on successfully navigating 2020, and have a wonderful 2021. We'll see you later.